I whispered, "Please come get me." I had no idea the Mafia boss heard my fear that night. The stairwell at Calder House Inn smelled like rain and floor wax, and I remember thinking that was a strange last thing to notice before I died. My back was against the linen closet door on the second-floor landing, and the private party in the blue room had gone quiet in the wrong kind of way. Men laugh a certain way when they are drinking. They laugh a different way when they have stopped drinking and started deciding. I had heard that second kind of laugh 3 times in my life, and every time it had come from someone about to hurt an older person for money. That was the sound coming through the wall now, and it was coming closer to the door. Somebody in that room had already said the word inheritance twice, and somebody else had already answered with the word convince. And I had understood, standing very still with my palm on the linen shelf, that the second word was the dangerous one. I lifted the desk phone off its cradle in the little office behind the linen closet, and I dialed the only number I knew by heart. My father answered on the second ring, because he is 72, and he always answers on the second ring. I did not raise my voice. I could not. 2 of the men in the blue room were standing right on the other side of the wall, close enough that I could hear the ice in one of their glasses. My hand, holding the receiver, had gone completely dry. My mouth had gone the same way. When you are afraid at a level your body understands before your mind does, the moisture leaves you first. And I remember thinking, absurdly, that I would not be able to swallow if I needed to speak louder than a whisper. "Dad," I whispered, "please come get me." I did not know that a 53-year-old man named Rocco Bellaforte was sitting 3 feet from my father in the garage on Route 9, drinking bad coffee out of a paper cup. I did not know that Rocco had recognized a voice bleeding through the phone speaker, a soft, sour voice belonging to a man he had barred from using his name 2 winters earlier. I did not know that when my father said, "Sweetheart, hang on," Rocco Bellaforte had already reached for his coat, and that he had said very quietly to my father, "Owen, get in the car." I did not know that my father, who had known Rocco for 28 years, had, without asking a single question, already reached for the keys on the pegboard by the garage door. The next 20 minutes of my life ran on a strange, thin rail. I heard the blue room door open. I heard boots on the hallway carpet. I heard a man named Terrence ask, in a voice designed to sound polite, whether the 2 elderly couples who owned the corner properties on Foundry Lane wanted to sign, or whether they wanted to keep making things difficult. I had checked those couples in myself. They were in their 80s. One of them had brought me a jar of pickled beets and told me the recipe was from her mother in Croatia. The other couple had come to the inn every autumn since before I was born, and the wife always cried a little the first night, because her sister had died there in 1994, and the room they stayed in had been her sister's favorite. These were the people the men in the blue room were preparing to lean on. I stood in the linen closet with the receiver against my chest, and I tried to breathe the way a person breathes when they are not there. My name is Maeve Calder. I am 29. I am the night manager of a 12-room inn my mother built and my father kept, up above the river near Cold Spring, New York. Before that night, I had never heard the name Bellaforte spoken out loud. Before that night, I had never met a man whose stillness could quiet a room. I need to tell you what happened next because I still do not fully understand it, and because the very last thing we found in my father's garage has kept me awake every single night since. The man who came up the inn stairs did not come up the way men come upstairs when they are angry. He came up the way water fills a cellar, quietly, deciding what to touch. I opened the linen closet a half-inch when I heard the blue room door bang open, and I saw him for the first time, and my brain refused, for 1 full second, to process what I was looking at. A tall man in a dark gray overcoat, hair going silver at the temples, hands empty and loose at his sides. He was not sweating. He was not hurrying. He walked past Terrence without touching him, and Terrence, who had never once been quiet in my presence in the 2 months he had been drinking at my bar and telling the bartender exactly how important he was, went quiet. "Where is the manager on duty?" the man said, and his voice was low, and he did not phrase it as a question. I stepped out of the closet because I did not know what else a manager on duty was supposed to do. He looked at me for a long, still moment, and then he said my name. Not Miss, not you, my name. Maeve. He said it like he had been carrying it in his pocket. Your father sent me, he said. Get your coat. Walk with me. Do not look at anyone in that room. I have replayed that walk down the inn's front stairs many times in my head. I remember the framed photograph of my mother by the front desk. I remember the rain on the porch light. I remember the older couples in the parlor who did not know how close they had come to something terrible. I remember Terrence in the blue room doorway watching us leave, and I remember the exact shape his face made when he realized the man in the gray overcoat was not going to be spoken to, or paid, or reasoned with. It was the face of a man who has just realized the ground he was standing on belonged to somebody else, and had belonged to them for longer than he had been alive. We reached the gravel lot. There was a black sedan, and my father was standing beside it in his mechanic's jacket, and when he saw me, he closed his eyes for a full breath before he opened them again. That, more than anything else that night, told me how afraid he had been. My father does not close his eyes. Maeve, he said, this is Rocco. He is an old customer of mine. He is going to help us tonight. Get in the car, honey. And I remember that he did not say the word friend. He said customer. My father chooses his words the way a mechanic chooses a wrench, and the word he chose that night was one I did not yet understand. I got in the back of the sedan. Rocco got in the front. Nobody spoke for the first mile, and that is where the story most people would have told ends, and where the story I actually lived began. Because as we came around the bend at the old dairy, Rocco Bellaforte said without turning around, "The men upstairs used my name. I need you to tell me everything you saw, exactly the way you saw it, and I need you to understand that if you leave anything out to protect me from embarrassment, people die." I told him. I told him about Terrence. I told him about the elderly couples on Foundry Lane and the two on Riverbend Road. I told him about the notebook I had seen open on the blue room table, the columns of addresses, the check marks, the names circled twice in red. I told him because my father was in the passenger seat, and my father had nodded once, very small, when I hesitated. When I finished, Rocco was silent for a long time. Then he said quietly, "Those men do not work for me. They work under my name, which is worse." If you have ever had a moment where your whole understanding of a situation turns like a key in a lock, please let me know in the comments, because that is what happened to me in the back of that sedan. I had assumed I was being rescued by a dangerous man. I realized, slowly, that I was riding beside a dangerous man who was more furious about the misuse of his name than about the danger to a stranger. I did not know yet whether that was better or worse. I only knew he had not once asked what I would owe him for the ride, and that in my experience up to that point, every man who did not name a price out loud was already planning to write one down later. I want to pause here for one small thing. If this opening has already gotten under your skin, do me a favor and tap the like button and subscribe, because this story is going to keep turning, and I want to know you are with me. There are 3 separate traps still ahead of me in this story, and I did not see any of them coming. Rocco did not take me to a mansion. He took me to a narrow brick carriage house behind a florist's shop on the edge of Peekskill, and he sat me at a kitchen table with a chipped enamel top, and he made me a cup of coffee that was not too sweet, because he had watched, in the space of one car ride, the way I set aside the sugar packet my father offered me. That was the first small thing. He said, "You will stay here 2 nights while I take care of the men who used my name. Your father is 1 door down. There is a dog. His name is Rook. He is old and he snores. Do not step on him. If you go to the kitchen at night, turn the small light over the stove, not the overhead. He does not like the overhead. He was left in a house with an overhead light burning for 2 days before I found him. He remembers. Rook was an 11-year-old Mastiff mix with gray around his muzzle and hips that no longer worked the way hips are supposed to. He had been rescued by Rocco, my father told me later, from a foreclosed farmhouse where the owners had been dragged out at gunpoint by people wearing a different family's colors. Rocco had gone back for the dog personally, 3 days after the seizure, and had lifted him into the passenger seat of his own car because Rook could no longer jump. That was the second small thing. I filed it. I file things. It is a habit that would, in the weeks that followed, save my life more than once. That is the thing older people know that younger people forget. The small details are almost never small. They are the receipts a person leaves behind when they do not know they are being read. I told Rocco, on the second morning, that I would not be moving to any luxury safe house. I said it politely. I said it with my coffee cup in both hands. I said, "My father is here. My inn is 10 miles up the road. My guests trust the front desk to be answered by a person who knows their names. If you want to protect me somewhere I can still be a person." He looked at me for a long moment, and then he nodded once and he said, "That is a fair request." He did not smile, but something behind his eyes moved, and I felt for the first time in a great many years that I had been heard by someone who did not usually have to listen, and who was choosing, in that moment, to make an exception for the daughter of a man who had once refused to take his money. The first trap came 4 days later, and I still do not know which of them designed it, only that it was elegant. I had been at Rocco's small office above the florist's shop, dropping off a signed statement about the blue room, when a phone rang in the next room, and Rocco stepped out to answer it. I was alone in the office for perhaps 90 seconds. I did not open a drawer. I did not touch a paper. I set my coat over the arm of the chair, and I sat, and I waited, and then he came back and drove me home. That night, hanging my coat on the peg in my father's mudroom, I felt the weight in the inside pocket. I reached in, and I found a manila envelope, sealed, thick, unmistakable. I did not open it. I knew what it was by the feel of it. I sat down on the mudroom step with the coat in my lap, and I did the only thing I could think to do. I called Rocco. He came within the hour. He did not knock. He looked at the envelope. He looked at me. And I watched, in real time, a decision being weighed behind his eyes that could have ended very badly for me. Then I remembered something. 2 days earlier, I had photographed my own coat. The seamstress at the inn had asked me to send her a picture of a loose button before she reordered the thread. The photograph was time-stamped. In the picture, the inside pocket of my coat was clearly, visibly empty, and the picture had been taken 40 minutes before I ever set foot in Rocco's office. I handed him my phone. He looked at the picture for a long time. Then he looked at the envelope. Then he looked at the ceiling, and I understood that he was not looking at the ceiling. He was thinking about which of his people had been in that office in the 90 seconds I was alone. There were only 3 names on that list. I could see him counting them behind his eyes, and I could see, too, that one of the 3 names was the name of somebody he had known since he was a boy. "Someone wants me to stop trusting you," he said finally. "They are very early to be doing that, which means they are afraid of how quickly I already do." I did not know what to say to that, so I did not say anything. That was the third small thing. He noticed. I saw him notice. He set the envelope on the mudroom step between us like it was a small dead animal, and he told me very simply, "Keep the picture. Keep the coat. Do not tell anyone at all what you just told me, including your father, until I tell you it is safe. Especially not your father. He is a good man, and good men have a habit of trying to fix things by saying them out loud." The second trap came a week later, and it was uglier. I had been sleeping in the small guest room over the florist shop on nights when the inn was quiet, because Rocco's people had cleaned it, and Rook liked the radiator in there, and I had, without meaning to, begun to like the sound of Rook breathing in the dark. One evening, one of Rocco's men, a quiet young captain named Matteo, walked in with a burner phone in a plastic bag and set it on the kitchen table, and would not look at me. The phone had been found under the mattress in the guest room. It contained 3 text messages exchanged with a number belonging to a rival family in New Jersey. The messages were vague, but they were incriminating enough to hang me. Rocco read them twice. Then he set the phone down and he asked me, calmly, when I had last changed the sheets in that room. I told him I had changed them the day before, on Tuesday, at about 4 in the afternoon. He asked whether anyone else had been in the room since. I said only Rook and only the housekeeper, a woman named Anna who had been with Rocco for 11 years, and only briefly Celia's driver, a man named Franco, who had come in to drop off a package of cigars for Dominic and had gone into the guest room to use the small side bathroom. Rocco called Rook over. Rook came, slowly because Rook does everything slowly. Rocco held the plastic bag out. Rook sniffed it once, and then his ears went back, and his tail dropped, and he made a small, unhappy sound in his throat. Rocco set the bag down. He asked one of his men to walk Franco past the doorway on some invented errand. Franco walked past, whistling. Rook made the same sound and turned his big head away. It was not proof. Rocco said so out loud twice, both to me and to Matteo. But it was enough to slow him down. Rook was reacting to a solvent, the strong, bitter kind used in machine shops. Franco worked out of a machine shop on weekends. Whoever had planted the phone had handled it with hands smelling of that solvent, and had then, at some point in the last few hours, either passed it to Franco or been Franco. That night, I sat with Rook on the kitchen floor and I put my hand on the wide, flat plate of his head, and I said thank you out loud, because a dog is allowed to be told thank you, and because I could not yet say it to the man who had rescued him. Rocco was standing in the doorway. I did not see him at first. When I did, he did not step in. He watched. Then he went upstairs. I heard the floorboards above me creak in a slow pattern that I later understood was a man pacing. The third trap I did not survive so cleanly. Rocco, testing something, told me a shipping route he was moving through the yards near Yonkers on the following Tuesday. He told me only me. He mentioned it once, at the kitchen table, in a passing sentence about the traffic on the sawmill and a broken axle he had asked my father to look at. 2 mornings later, an enemy crew was waiting at that yard. Rocco lost 2 men before his people cleared it. One of them, I later learned, was a father of 3 from Yonkers who had asked Rocco, at Christmas, to be the godfather of his youngest. He did not raise his voice at me. He did not raise his voice at anyone. He simply stopped speaking to me. For 3 full days. I ate my meals in silence. I walked Rook in silence. I understood that a door had closed in a house I had not realized I was living inside, and I did not know how to open it again. My father saw it in my face on the 4th morning, and he asked, and I told him, and he said quietly, "Maeve, he is not stupid. Give him a little time. Some men have to think in the dark before they can think in the light." But I was not sure Rocco was going to give me any. The break, when it came sideways. It came through Dominic. Uncle Dominic Bellaforte was 76 years old. He had helped Rocco's father build the family 30 years earlier. 2 years before I met him, he had suffered what everyone described as a mild stroke, and he had, since then, lived in a wide, sunny room at the back of Rocco's Westchester estate, sipping thin broth, forgetting names, patting the arms of the women who brought him his medications. He had asked me, on my second visit, to help him sort his pills into a plastic organizer, because his hands, he said, were not what they used to be. I had helped him. I had helped him every Wednesday afternoon for 3 weeks. It was a small kindness. It cost me nothing. I liked him. He told me stories about the Hudson River in the 60s, about barges and blackouts and a woman named Lily who had run a diner in Beacon. He asked about my father. He asked, always, whether the inn was quiet. On the Wednesday after the Yonkers yard, Dominic's afternoon pills were wrong. 2 of them were the correct color and shape, but the wrong dosage, and one of them was a medication he had never been prescribed at all. He took them at 3. By 3:30, his pulse had climbed to 130, and his breathing had gone shallow and rattly, and I was standing over him with the pill organizer in my hand. I want you to understand what happened in the next 90 seconds, because it is the moment I stopped being a person things were happening to, and started being a person doing things. I could have put the organizer down. I could have walked out of the room and washed my hands and prepared my defense, because I already understood, from the way the pills sat wrong in the little plastic wells, that this was going to be blamed on me. Instead, I sat down on the edge of Dominic's bed and I put 2 fingers against his wrist and I counted. And I told the woman at the door to bring me the nurse and to bring me a bottle of activated charcoal from the guest bathroom and to call the doctor Rocco kept on retainer. And I said all of it in the same flat voice I use when a guest complains about a room, because that is the voice that gets things done. The doctor arrived in 11 minutes. Dominic lived. He was groggy for 2 days and querulous for a week, And on the third day he squeezed my hand and told me, in front of Rocco, that I had a level head and that he was very glad his brother's son had brought me into the house. I remember he called Rocco his brother's son, not his nephew. I remember thinking that was a formal way to speak, and then I put the thought away. Rocco did not say anything. He looked at me across Dominic's bed for a long, unreadable moment. And then, that night, in the kitchen, with Rook asleep on the floor and no one else in the room, he said the thing that changed everything. "Every time," he said, "every time I begin to trust you a little more, something appears. The coat, the phone, the route, now the pills. It is a pattern. It is not random. It is a test. And I do not think I am the one being tested. I think I am the one being measured." I sat down across from him. I put my hands flat on the enamel. I said, "I noticed the same thing about 10 days ago. I was afraid to tell you. I thought if I said it out loud, you would think I was inventing a story to explain the next one." He looked at me for a long time, and then he almost smiled, and he said, "Maeve, nobody invents a story that features a photograph of a loose button." That was the night we made our plan. If someone was measuring how much evidence it would take to turn Rocco against me, we would give them the answer they wanted. We would give them a fracture. We would give them a public collapse. And then we would watch very carefully which hand reached out to catch the pieces. Before I tell you how that went, I want to ask you something honestly. If you were in my place, and the man who had walked up your stairs in a gray overcoat was now asking you to help him lie to his own family about the state of his own heart, would you have said yes? Tell me in the comments. I am curious whether the people watching this would have made the same choice I did, because I still am not sure I made the right one. We built the fracture carefully, over 3 days, the way a stagehand builds a set. Rocco raised his voice at me at a family dinner over something small and unfair, a comment about a missing set of keys and a delivery to the inn that had gone late. I flinched the way people flinch when the person shouting is a person they have started to care about, and I left the table. And I did not come back the next day, or the day after. Rocco sent a message through Matteo saying that my father's protection would continue but that I was no longer welcome in Belafort houses. I moved my things out of the room above the florist's shop. Rook watched me pack. He put his head on my duffel bag and would not lift it, and I had to slide the bag out from under him 1 inch at a time. And I cried in the driveway for the first time since I had been a child. Celia Bellaforte, Rocco's 47-year-old sister, came to see me at the inn 6 days later. She was elegant and careful, wearing a camel coat and gold at her ears, and she brought me a small dish of almond cookies, and she told me, in a voice full of kind pity, that she had always known Rocco would eventually come to his senses. She said she was sorry it had taken so long, and she was sorry too that I had gotten hurt in the process. She sat in the parlor of Calder House, and she watched my face for pain, and I gave her a little because I had rehearsed. I gave her just enough. She left with a small, tight smile at the corner of her mouth. My father saw her out. When he came back into the parlor, he said, "That is a woman who thinks she has just won something." I said, "Good, let her spend it." 2 weeks later, Celia overreached. She sent a courier to a Bellaforte captain named Rinaldi with a folded piece of paper suggesting that Maeve Calder had been feeding information to a rival crew about the planned expansion of a legitimate Bellaforte hotel in Tarrytown. The information on that paper was very specific. It named a floor, a date, a contractor, and a bank. It was also completely, deliberately false. Rocco had told it to me over the phone the night before, on a line we knew Celia was listening on, and to no one else at all. When Rinaldi walked into Rocco's office with that folded paper, Rocco was already waiting for him with a chair pulled out and a pot of coffee on the desk. They brought Celia in that evening. She did not deny it for long. When Rocco asked her why, she cried, and then she stopped crying. And then she said, in a small, stunned voice, "Uncle told me she was going to take you from us. He said you were forgetting what family was. He said she was the shape of the thing he had been afraid of for years." For a long moment, nobody in the room breathed. Then Rocco stood up, and he walked out of the room, and he walked down the hallway to the wide, sunny room at the back of the house, and he sat down at the foot of Dominic's bed. Dominic was awake. Dominic had been awake for a while. "Nephew," Dominic said, and his voice was not the voice I had heard for 3 weeks over the pill organizer. It was clearer. It was steadier. It was the voice of a man who had been resting his throat for a long, patient season. Rocco said, "Tell me," Dominic told him, not with shame, with something closer to relief. He said that Rocco had grown soft. He said that a man who refused to let his people press elderly couples off their land was a man who had forgotten what the family had been built on. He said the family needed to be shaken, and that Rocco needed to shake it himself, and that the only way to make Rocco shake it was to make him believe his own captains were slipping away from him. Dominic had used Celia. He had fed her fear, and he had watched her manufacture the traps. He had watched me survive them, one after another, and he had, he admitted, begun to find that interesting. He said the word interesting with a small, dry smile that told me exactly how much of his stroke had been real, which was to say almost none of it. His plan, in its final stage, had been to send false intelligence through Celia to Rocco, suggesting that 4 of Rocco's most experienced captains were preparing to defect to a rival family in Queens. He believed Rocco, humiliated by my apparent betrayal and rattled by the medication scare, would move against those 4 men on instinct. He believed Rocco would purge his own most loyal structure, and that the Belafort organization, gutted from within, would be easy to swallow within a season. What Dominic did not know was that the 4 defection stories had already reached Rocco. Each one had been shaped, subtly, in a slightly different way, by me and by Rocco, on 4 different phone calls we knew Dominic's network was monitoring. Each version had traveled a slightly different path. Each path had led back, cleanly, to a specific person in Dominic's remaining circle. By the time Dominic was ready to act, Rocco already had the map of every hand in every pocket. There was no purge. There was no massacre. There was only, over the course of one long, quiet evening, a series of small, firm reassignments. The captains Dominic had wanted removed were promoted. The men Dominic had been counting on were pulled off their posts and sent to legitimate jobs in the Bellaforte hotels upstate. Jobs with real hours and real pay, and no doors that opened at 3 in the morning. By dawn, Dominic's network no longer existed. Rocco did not raise his voice at Dominic either. He sat by the bed for a long time and he said finally, "You taught my father how to tie a tie when he was 14. I remember that story. I am going to keep you alive, and I am going to keep you comfortable, and I am never going to let you speak to a member of this family again without a person in the room. You will die old, Uncle. You will not die dangerous." Dominic nodded. He did not argue. There was in his face something that looked almost like respect, and I understood, watching from the doorway, that this was the outcome he had on some level been hoping his nephew was capable of. I thought for about 6 hours that the story was over. I sat on the porch of Calder House Inn with a mug of coffee that was not too sweet, and my father sat beside me, and Rocco sat on the top step with his elbows on his knees, and Rook was asleep across all 3 sets of our feet. It was cold. It was the good kind of cold, the kind that makes the river smell like iron and the porch boards feel steady under your shoes. Rocco looked at me and he did not say the words. He did not have to. I looked back, and I did not say them either. We had earned something in that kitchen with the enamel table, and we both knew what it was, and neither of us needed to name it out loud yet. Then my father's phone rang. It was one of his neighbors from down the road, a man named Hollis who runs the feed store. My father had left the garage light on. My father never leaves the garage light on. My father drove down alone. Rocco and I stayed on the porch. 20 minutes later, my father called back, and his voice was strange, thin, the voice a man uses when he has just picked up something he does not want to be holding. "Maeve," he said, "there is a cassette recorder in the wall cabinet above the parts bin. It was wrapped in plastic. The dust on top of the cabinet has not been touched in months. Somebody put it there before all of this started. I think you and Rocco need to come hear this. Now." We drove down. The 3 of us stood in the garage under the one bare bulb. My father set the cassette player on the workbench and pressed play. A man's voice, unhurried, unfamiliar, older maybe, or maybe only tired, filled the small room. The voice did not identify itself. It said in order 5 things. It said that on a rainy Tuesday in October, at approximately 9:40 in the evening, Maeve Calder would become frightened at the inn she managed. It said that she would use the office phone behind the linen closet to call her father. It said that she would whisper 4 words. "Please come get me." It said that Rocco Bellaforte would be sitting in Owen Calder's garage when the call arrived. It said that Rocco Bellaforte would go to the inn himself, and that he would take Maeve Calder home with him. Then the voice paused. Then it said one more thing. The point, the voice said, was never for Rocco to arrive at the inn. The point was for Rocco to take her home. Everything after that is theirs to keep or to lose. The tape clicked off. The 3 of us stood in the garage without speaking. Rocco reached out very slowly and turned the cassette in its case. There was no label. There were no fingerprints in the plastic wrap that anyone was ever going to lift. Dominic, from his guarded room, had already sworn on the memory of his brother that he had never touched a cassette, had never known about the gathering at the inn, had never chosen me, had never even heard my name until Celia said it 3 weeks after that first rainy night. Dominic, whatever else he was, did not lie about his brother, and Rocco knew it. I looked at Rocco. Rocco looked at me. And for the first time since I had stepped out of the linen closet in a gray overcoat's shadow, I saw a small, honest flicker of fear cross his face. Not fear of a rival, not fear of a purge, fear of the shape of a thing he could not yet see, a thing that had been patient enough to hide a cassette in a garage months before a phone had ever rung, patient enough to know that a mechanic on Route 9 would leave a light on the wrong night, patient enough to trust that a young woman would whisper exactly the 4 words a stranger had already written down. He said quietly, "Someone chose you, Maeve. Someone chose you before I knew you existed, and they wanted you here, in this house, with me." I did not answer. I could not. I put my hand on Rook's head instead, because Rook had followed us down and was leaning his weight against my knee. And I thought about the coat and the phone and the route and the pills, and I thought about all the traps I had survived, and I thought about how none of them, not one of them, had ever really been the point. The point was the porch step. The point was the coffee that was not too sweet. The point was the moment on the enamel table when I had said, "I noticed the same thing about 10 days ago." And Rocco had almost smiled. Someone, somewhere, had wanted that moment to happen. Someone had known that Rocco Bellaforte, presented with a frightened woman in his oldest friend's care, would not send a soldier. Someone had known he would go himself. Someone had known that once he brought me under his own roof, whatever grew there would grow whether he wanted it to or not. And whoever that someone was, they had counted on Rocco's decency the way another kind of person might have counted on his cruelty. If this story has held you all the way here, please do me one last favor. Tap the like button, and if you have not subscribed, subscribe now, because whatever comes next is not going to be quiet, and I would like you with me when we find out who put that cassette in my father's garage. And tell me, honestly, in the comments, one thing. If you had been standing in that garage with us, listening to a stranger's voice describe the worst night of your life before it happened, would you have stayed with the man in the gray overcoat, knowing someone unseen wanted you exactly where you were? Or would you have walked out that garage door and kept walking? Because I stayed. I am still staying. And somewhere out there, whoever recorded that tape is, I think, still listening.